For thousands of years, humanity has asked the same question in different languages, under different skies, in different empires. Is history random? Or is it moving along a timeline written long before we were born? What if the rise and fall of civilizations, the wars that redraw borders, the technologies that reshape reality, and the moral shifts that fracture societies were not isolated events, but chapters in an ancient script? What if the future is not a surprise waiting to happen, but a pattern already described in symbols, visions, and prophecies recorded thousands of years ago? Tonight, we investigate a possibility that is both unsettling and electrifying. That humanity is not drifting through chaos, but moving through an ancient timeline toward a defined conclusion. Why does this matter now? Because we are living in a moment of acceleration, unlike anything recorded in previous centuries, where artificial intelligence reshapes labor and warfare, where global conflicts erupt with nuclear shadows looming behind them, where digital currencies challenge traditional financial systems, and where moral and cultural foundations shift faster than institutions can adapt. In times like these, people instinctively look forward, trying to predict what comes next. But what if the answers are not in the future at all, and instead lie buried in ancient texts that described global empires, unified systems of control, an unprecedented tribulation long before satellites orbited the Earth or microchips powered economies? One of the most discussed prophetic timelines comes from the Book of Daniel, written in the 6th century BCE, during the Babylonian exile, where the prophet describes a dream given to King Nebuchadnezzar of a massive statue composed of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and iron mixed with clay, each metal representing successive world empires that would dominate history, beginning with Babylon and followed by Medo-Persia, Greece under Alexander the Great, and Rome. A sequence that remarkably aligns with the historical record preserved by secular historians. Daniel later describes 4 beasts rising from the sea, each symbolizing these same empires in more vivid, almost violent imagery, culminating in a final kingdom characterized by unprecedented power and fragmentation, symbolized by iron mixed with clay, strong yet internally divided. Centuries later, in the Book of Revelation, written by John of Patmos, during the Roman Empire, we see imagery that echoes Daniel's visions, including a beast with 10 horns, a global system that influences commerce and allegiance, and a mark associated with economic participation. Imagery that for centuries seemed symbolic and distant, but now invites new interpretation in a world where biometric identification, digital payment systems, and centralized data tracking are not speculative fiction, but operational realities. Revelation also speaks of a period of global turmoil, conflict, and deception preceding what it calls the establishment of a final kingdom not built by human hands, but imposed from beyond human authority, a theme that mirrors Daniel's description of a stone cut without hands that shatters the statue of empires and establishes an everlasting dominion. Throughout history, skeptics have argued that such prophecies were written after the fact or interpreted too broadly, yet the chronological sequence of empires in Daniel, culminating in Rome and followed by a divided phase symbolized by iron and clay, has intrigued scholars for centuries, especially considering that the Roman Empire did not simply vanish but transformed, fractured, and evolved into multiple European powers, creating a legacy of political fragmentation that still defines the Western world today. The idea of a revived or restructured form of empire emerging from the remnants of Rome has been a recurring theme in theological and historical analysis, particularly as modern political unions and supranational bodies attempt to unify diverse nations under shared economic and legal frameworks. When we examine modern global structures, we see institutions that transcend national sovereignty, financial systems that operate beyond borders, and communication networks that connect billions instantly, creating the infrastructure for a level of centralized influence unimaginable in ancient times, yet conceptually aligned with descriptions of a system that regulates commerce and allegiance on a global scale. We observe the increasing use of digital identification, central bank digital currencies under development in multiple nations, and artificial intelligence systems capable of monitoring behavior patterns in real time. Developments that, while technological achievements, also raise questions about surveillance, autonomy, and control that echo ancient warnings about power consolidated in the hands of a unified authority. The pattern becomes even more compelling when we consider the prophetic emphasis on moral and spiritual conditions preceding the climax of history, where texts describe societies calling good evil and evil good, where truth becomes contested terrain, and where deception spreads rapidly among populations. Conditions that resonate in an era defined by information warfare, deepfakes, algorithm-driven echo chambers, and polarized societies struggling to agree on basic facts. The timeline described in these ancient records does not merely outline political transitions, but highlights cultural decay, ethical confusion, and global unrest as precursors to a final confrontation between human governance and divine intervention. Hidden in plain sight is a structural pattern. Successive empires rise with promises of order and stability, expand through power and innovation, reach a peak of influence, then fracture internally before being replaced. And each transition brings humanity closer to a more interconnected, more centralized system, as if history itself is converging toward unity before rupture. From Babylon's centralized authority to Rome's legal and infrastructural integration, to today's digital networks that bind continents into a single economic organism, the trajectory suggests increasing consolidation followed by instability, mirroring the iron mixed with clay, strong yet brittle, unified yet divided. What does this mean for the future of humanity? It does not require blind belief to acknowledge that the world is moving toward deeper integration and greater tension simultaneously. And it does not require fanaticism to observe that ancient prophetic frameworks describe a climax, involving global governance, economic control, widespread conflict, and a transformative intervention that resets the structure of power itself, whether one interprets these texts literally, symbolically, or historically. The convergence of technological capability, geopolitical volatility, and cultural upheaval creates an environment where the ancient timeline feels less like mythology and more like a mirror reflecting our present trajectory. The warning embedded within these prophecies is not merely about catastrophe, but about awareness, about recognizing patterns before they fully mature, about understanding that power systems built solely on human ambition eventually collapse under their own contradictions, and about preparing not just materially but morally for periods of instability that test the foundations of society. The timeline suggests that humanity's greatest achievements in unity and innovation may coincide with its greatest vulnerabilities, and that the final chapter of this age involves both unprecedented crises and unprecedented transformation. So the question is no longer whether ancient texts contain symbolic visions of empires, because history confirms that they do, but whether we are approaching the final phase of the sequence they describe, the stage where strength and fragility coexist, where global systems promise security yet generate anxiety, where connectivity increases while trust declines. Are we witnessing the closing movements of a timeline written millennia ago? Or are we projecting modern fears onto poetic metaphors? The investigation remains open, but the parallels are difficult to ignore. If the ancient timeline is real, then the future of humanity is not an accident waiting to happen, but a convergence long in motion. And if it is merely symbolic, it still offers a profound warning about cycles of power, corruption, and collapse that have repeated across civilizations. Either way, the message is clear. History moves in patterns. Empires are temporary, and moments of global consolidation often precede seismic change. The signal from the past is not whispering anymore. It is pulsing through headlines, technologies, and shifting alliances. This is not a call to fear, but a call to attention, because the most dangerous moment in any timeline is when people assume that nothing fundamental can change. When comfort dulls perception and noise drowns out patterns, the ancient record suggests that transformation arrives suddenly after long preparation, like a stone cut without hands, striking a structure that seemed immovable. And if that pattern holds true, then we are not merely spectators of history, but participants in a turning point foreseen thousands of years ago. The transmission is simple, and it echoes across centuries. Watch the patterns, question the systems, understand the timeline, because the future of humanity may already be written in the oldest pages we possess, waiting for a generation willing to read them not as myths, but as signals.